Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Roger Timoneri. Thanks for joining us again. We've got a great show planned for you today. We're talking about podcasting, but not just podcasting in general. We're talking specifically about narrowcasting. Our guest today is none other than Mike Wixson. He's the owner of the Pod Plant in Toronto. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Roger. Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. So you and I do a lot of work podcasting together. You're the guy behind the scenes, making it all happen. You've got years and years of podcasting experience, years and years of radio and broadcasting experience. Tell us a bit about the landscape of podcasting today in the context of narrowcasting.
It's an interesting word because I think the number one question, it's such a great question, Roger, because the number one question I get from people is, well, there's so many podcasts out there. How's it possible that mine would cut through? And so your question is really poignant because podcasts have more to do with reaching your existing audience in many cases than it does reaching a wider audience. It's a great way to communicate to the community or to your corporation or to your local sports organization, to your industry perhaps. But not everybody needs to be Joe Rogan, and that doesn't necessarily have to be the purpose of your podcast.
Right. Hence the notion of narrowcasting.
Which means really just finding your community and making sure your content is directed toward them properly, that you have interesting guests and news and things to talk about that make a difference in that industry, that community, or in that narrowcast group. By the way, that could be spread around the world. It might just be podcast engineers, for example, that have an interest in a specific podcast. But they go there every week or every month because they know it's valuable content to them.
Right. And I love the idea of narrowcasting. I was thinking earlier about the idea of creating a show specifically for a given demographic. In my case, it would be for parents of teenage athletes looking to go to university in either Canada or the States on an athletic scholarship. So a very narrow field, very narrow demographic, but a great opportunity to narrowcast into that space.
I have to agree. That's a really good example. It is a small group of people, but there's a lot of information to communicate. There's many ways that you could find stories that make a difference to these people that help them with their journey in that space. And, if you're looking for a means of profitability through podcasting, I think you have to build backward from that. What would it cost you to send a mailer to that group of people if indeed you could find them? And what would it cost you to build or buy a list of that narrowcast community to reach out to them? When podcasting is so search relevant because the Google, the search engines overall, and now AI search taps into podcasts based on search strings and things you've talked about. So the likelihood of reaching your audience and captivating them seems to have a much higher response. Therefore, the cost of doing it drops dramatically.
Right. And now we're at the point in time where we can create a turnkey podcast for a client. They can narrowcast into a very specific field, and all they do is show up and record. Can you talk a bit about some scenarios that you've been working on where you've made it really easy for somebody to start their own podcast?
The one that I love the most, frankly, is James Maloney. He's a politician. He represents us in the neighborhood where we have our studios federally, and his reason for adopting podcasting was community outreach, the ability for him to reach out to his constituents and have meaningful discussion and give them updates. It's disarming, but I also love it, Roger, because it gave birth to some amazing small shorts for YouTube with him touching on very topical points, which then lead to really great social media posts, which then in his real life lead to targeted questions from other media, on those same topics, because it positions him as an expert or somebody in our government who has an opinion on that topic. And so I love that podcast because it serves so many purposes out of one discussion.
Oh, absolutely. And the technology that we use now can even generate editorial from the podcast based on the podcast transcript, which is
That is
hugely
true.
advantageous.
That is true. It is a big advantage when it comes to search engine optimization because content and backlinking is everything, and making sure that you're relevant on a topic. So we're now even able to test your topic matter afterward to find out which elements of your podcast are going to reach your narrowcast audience most effectively. And that's endlessly helpful.
Right. And I love the notion that narrowcasting doesn't necessarily have to deal with a specific topic. It could deal with a given geographical area, like in your example, Etobicoke Lakeshore, James Maloney's constituency in West Toronto. So I could appreciate how other politicians would really be able to use narrowcasting to their advantage. So would realtors, for that example.
Absolutely, because your podcast doesn't need to be about how great a realtor you are. We're going to assume that. Your credibility is in the sale. But it does give you an opportunity to talk about a specific home in detail, to add imagery to that, to then extract that and post it almost instantaneously to your social media track, to Facebook, to your client base, to existing people that you know are looking for homes in an effective, really professional looking manner.
Right. And as we know, real estate's all about location, location, location. So those realtors could be experts in their given geographical territory. A lot of people these days are looking to, buy a second property, maybe out of the city or flat out move from the city out towards the country, like even past the suburbs. So there's opportunities for now more rural-based realtors to showcase the areas that they cover, as well as showcasing the actual home that's for sale.
That is so true. And we can even take it one step further if you wish and target advertising really right down to the postal code through YouTube, Google, of course, Spotify, which is a really big form of advertising. The people that hear Spotify ads on their favorite podcasts tend to really react to them. And so now we have that ability to integrate your podcast into that campaign into social media into a backlink to the selling property. And all of it has the same consistent message. And I think that is the hardest part in maintaining media credibility, even in a narrowcast group.
Right. And you can even take it one step further in terms of adding traditional media and like print media. For example, the publications that I produce quarterly, namely Support Local and Fiat Lux, covering basically from Toronto up towards Collingwood. So there's an additional layer of narrowcasting just with the hyper-local nature of those publications as well.
Well, the only reason that I didn't mention it as one of my favorites off the top is seemed like a little bit of collusion going on there. But the truth is, what you're doing with Fiat Lux and what you're doing with Support Local have those very exact properties. You need to reach a local community, a physical space in this case, with Support Local. And you do that brilliantly by featuring the businesses that then can use that social media clip, can rely on it. The SEO drives back through the podcast to their link inside the description. The description then is a backlink to their website, making them more relevant overall with SEO. What you're doing with Fiat Lux is another great example. It's not necessarily as geographically targeted, but it does reach a certain demographic and psychographic. People with money, people who are professionals, people that have more than one property, people that look for luxury items. All of those are also searchable, really interesting topics, especially if they're positioned properly with the right content.
Absolutely. So, Mike, if someone's looking to, maybe set up their own podcast and focus on a narrow industry or space, what should their next step be?
Well, identifying who your audience is, first of all, is really important. Beyond that, what would you build that show to do? What are you going to deliver to that audience? How are you going to deliver it to them? Weekly, monthly? Is it going to be quarterly? what's your strategy for delivering a really valuable piece of information to a targeted group of people? That's the first consideration. From there, there's a million ways to produce a podcast. I've explained to you how we do it here at PodPlant, and of course through FIAT LUX. And I will say this, it's a system that we find that works really well for clients and even for ourselves. And so if you want to find out more, you certainly could reach out.
And how can people get a hold of you, Mike?
Oh, I was hoping you'd ask. Reach out to us at podplant.ca, podplant.ca.
Fantastic. Well, it was great chatting with you, Mike. Thanks for coming on the show. It's great to learn a bit more about podcasting and the power thereof, but also narrowcasting, which I think is maybe something new to a lot of our viewers, but it completely makes sense. And I think there's a huge opportunity in narrowcasting, certainly for me and what I do, but also for our viewers. And, you know, if you're open to the idea of starting your own podcast, definitely reach out to Mike.
I appreciate that. You know, it's funny, Roger, you and I cut our teeth during COVID, podcasting to a narrowcast group of people, and that was to the people in Etobicoke Lakeshore, which then led to a movement in that community to support local as soon as the doors could open again. And so to talk about narrowcasting with you is really meaningful to me because it's where I had the opportunity with podcasting to do it for the first time and to see the net results of it, which were more business, friendships, amazing experiences along the lakeshore. And so you're one of the pioneers in my life, narrowcasting. So hats off to you.
Well, thanks very much, Mike. And thank you for joining us. It's been wonderful having you. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thanks very much and take care.